Welcome to Unit 3, Knowledge, Lesson 2, Problems with Direct Realism, taken from CG, pages 285 to 292. Let us proceed with the lecture. Let's talk about some of the assets of direct realism as a theory of perceptual knowledge. First, direct realism is appealing because it captures our common sense view of the knowledge of the external world. Most of us think that when we perceive, for example, a truck, what we directly perceive is the truck. When we, turn to our significant others and hug them, what we are seeing and smelling and so on is our actual significant other, not something else which we perceive directly, and in virtue of perceiving that, we indirectly perceive our significant other. So it's just this common sense view of perceptual knowledge, and that is what makes it so appealing, and that's what we would call a benefit of it. But there's some questions we should consider before assessing whether or not direct realism is the true theory of our perception of the external world. So, and we're going to look at these questions during this lecture, and because what we're concerned is not just a theory that matches common sense. Voltaire, a philosopher, famously once said that common sense is not so common. Well, suppose Voltaire is wrong. It leads to another aphorism. Common sense is oftentimes false. It used to be a common sense view of the world that the sun rotated around the earth. Now we know better. Well, so just because direct realism is a common sense view of perceptual knowledge, that doesn't mean it's going to be true. Also doesn't mean it's going to be false. It's got to withstand critical scrutiny first. And what we're going to do during this lecture is critically scrutinize direct realism. So, where could there be problems then with direct realism? Well, we'd have to find evidence that is inconsistent with claims of direct realism as a theory. So if we find stuff that's inconsistent with stuff that direct realism claims, or stuff that is entailed by stuff that direct realism claims, then that would be evidence against direct realism. So what are some examples? Well, are there cases in which perception fails to yield knowledge of the existence of physical objects, or of the ways physical objects are? So remember the mind-independent component of direct realism? Something is mind-independent if it exists, and it is the way it is, independently of any perceiver. Well, if we find cases where perception fails to yield knowledge of either the existence of it or the way it actually is, then that could be a problem. Second, are there cases of perception in which we are not directly aware of the way in which an object really is? And third, are there cases of perception in which we are not directly aware of any external object at all? If there are yes answers to any of these questions, we need to take them seriously, and we need to evaluate direct realism in light of them. We need to see how direct realists could respond to these yes answers. For it is said that direct access to physical objects is reliable. It's a reliable means of acquiring perceptual beliefs. If the beliefs that we arrive at by perception are sometimes unreliably acquired, then in some cases our perceptual access to physical objects is not direct. So how are we going to handle these problem cases? And actually, the bigger question is, can direct realism account for these cases where we do not have direct perceptual access to physical objects, or we have inaccurate perception of these physical objects? Can it address those cases without requiring a change in the core commitments of the theory? And that's a big burden. Well, if our awareness of external objects is sometimes not direct, is there ever any reason to think that it ever is direct? I said ever one too many times. My bad. All right. Well, here's a little exercise that I want you to do right now. Stare at the colored dots on this girl's nose for about 30 seconds, and I'll tell you when to start. So you're going to stare at these 3 dots on this woman's nose for 30 seconds, and then quickly look away and look at a white wall or a white ceiling or anything that's purely white and start blinking rapidly. All right. So when I say go, start staring at the 3 dots. On your mark, get set, go. Ah, my bad. We'll start with this one more time. On your mark, get set, go. Keep staring. 20 seconds to go. Stare at the 3 dots. Ten seconds left. Keep staring. Okay, look at a white surface and start blinking rapidly. I'll give you about 10 seconds, 15 seconds. All right, if I was in the physical classroom, I'd hear a bunch of people going, whoa. And I'm sure you're doing that right now, but I can't hear you, or maybe not, because you just ignored this exercise. Moving along. If our awareness of external objects is then sometimes not direct, is there any reason to think that it is ever direct? So I'm just asking that same question again. Well...
Ladies and gentlemen, a magician named God.
What about the case of illusions? We could look at that first as to address the question. First off, what are some examples of cases where perception cannot be direct or cannot be of the way objects really are? So take the example of railroad tracks. Railroad tracks are parallel. They have to be. It's obvious. Trains would not be able to move if the lines were convergent or divergent. That is, they moved closer to each other or away from each other. All right? So for railroad cars to move, transport stuff, railroad tracks must be parallel. But now I don't advise you doing this because it's potentially dangerous. But hypothetically, suppose you were to stand on the end of railroad tracks and look down, like at this picture. Look what happens. These tracks are appearing to converge. So if I was to draw a line here and a line there, that would not be parallel. Instead, it's shaped like a triangle. Look. It's a triangle. When you stand at the end of the railroad tracks and look down, it looks like the tracks converge until they eventually meet at a point. So railroad tracks appear to converge, even though in reality they are parallel. Well, this is what we mean by an illusion, or what we'll call an illusion for this lecture. I'll stipulate that an illusion is just that. It's a case when an object appears to us to be different from the way it really is. So remember, mind independence says that an object is the way it is independently of any perceiver. Well, railroad tracks are parallel independently of any perceiver, but they don't appear to be parallel. They appear to converge. Well, here's the problem for the direct realist. The direct realist claims that the object of awareness just is the external object. Yet if the object of awareness is different from the physical object, then the object of awareness in the case of illusions cannot be the physical object. Remember Leibniz's law? Two things, they differ in their properties and they can't be identical. One is one way, one is another way. Okay. For real railroad tracks are parallel, yet when we see railroad tracks, they converge. So in the case of illusions, what we are directly aware of is not the physical object. Alright, another case is perceptual relativity. Suppose you ate a piece of candy and it's just so sweet. Well, do this. Get like a Snicker bar. Take a bite of it. So good. Alright, now take a salt packet. Squirt it on your tongue. Yeah, rub that salt. Gross, huh? Okay. Yeah, you got that salt taste in your mouth. Now, return to the Snickers bar and take another bite. What happens? It tastes salty now. Here's the point. Relative to the same perceiver, in different relations to the object, what we perceive differs. But the physical object just is the way it is. With the example of the Snickers. The Snickers bar hasn't changed. It's just that it tasted sweet, and then after you put the salt pack in your mouth, it tasted salty. And there are many other cases of this. So run some hot water. Actually, do this. Remember when you were growing up at the swimming pool, and then there was those, you know, you would also have a jacuzzi. The jacuzzi is full of hot water, and the swimming pool is not full of hot water. It's full of just, water at the same temperature as the air around you. So you get in the pool, and it's kind of cold, but kind of fun. And then your body adjusts, and then you get in the jacuzzi, and it's really hot. But then your body adjusts. And then you go jump in the pool again after you've been in the jacuzzi for a while. What happens? The pool water's really cold again. And then you go back in the jacuzzi and it's really hot. And then it eventually seems normal again. So the water hasn't changed, but it feels different as you move back and forth. All right? Or, take the example of a sprinkler on a hot summer day. It's that time of year where kids are playing the sprinklers. So in June, when it's 90 degrees outside, that water feels amazing. Cool water coming from the sprinkler, but suppose you were to do that in January. It'd be miserably cold. Even though the water, hasn't changed. Suppose the temperature of the water is the same, whether it's in the January or June, but it will still feel really cold in January and really warm in June. Or really pleasant in June and really miserable in January, all right? Well, if that of which we're aware is now one way, and now another, now sweet, later bitter, now warm, now cold, and the physical object isn't now one way and later another, it stayed the same, then when we describe that of which we're directly aware, we cannot be describing the physical object. The same applies with, a different problem arises from hallucinations. So in hallucination, one has an experience which is indistinguishable to the person having the experience from a normal experience of an external physical object. Whether this be due to a traumatic psychiatric illness, such as various versions of schizophrenia, or whether it be to drugs, or some endurance athletes hallucinate after putting their body through, just the rigors of whatever sport they're in. But at some point, you start perceiving stuff that aren't there. You hear voices that aren't there, or whatever. Well, how is the direct realist to handle hallucinations? For there are no external physical objects that correspond with the object of awareness of the person hallucinating. That is, the object of awareness is not a physical object. When you hallucinate a clown riding a cobra, there is no clown riding a cobra. There's whatever you see isn't there. Well, there's another problem that direct realists have to account for. It's the problem of time lag. So, most of you know some basic astronomy to know this. Light doesn't travel from one place to another instantaneously. It travels very fast, but not instantaneously. It actually takes time. Of course, like I said, it's fast, but it can't traverse any distance in no time. So, for example, it takes the light from the sun 8 minutes to reach the Earth. So I don't advise you doing this because you could really damage your eyesight. But if you were to look at the sun right now, what you're seeing is actually how the sun looked 8 minutes ago. You're seeing the light from the sun, but it took 8 minutes for that light to reach your retinas. Okay? Stars that are only 4 or 5 light years away, it actually takes 4 to 5 light years for the light from those stars to reach the Earth. There are other stars that are millions of light years away, and it takes even longer. Okay? Well, even, objects you see just down the street. Something may only be 100 feet, but it still takes light time to travel that 100 feet from whatever object it's reflecting off of and to reach your retina. Okay? That means when you looked at the sun, or the stars, or any physical object whatsoever, what you see is how it looked 8 minutes ago in the case of the sun, or however long it took for the light to reach your retinas and the other physical objects. When you see a star through a telescope in a nearby solar system that's 4 to 5 light years away, what you see is how the star looked 4 to 5 years ago. Even in this room, light takes some time to reach your retina. This is a problem that the direct realist needs to deal with. For, if, as the direct realist claims, the object of awareness just is the physical object, then how might he or she explain cases like the sun or other stars or what's across the room, where what you see, given that it takes time for light to reach your eyes, is how the physical object was when the light left it. So basically what you see is something in the past, not the present. It's not simultaneous, okay? So in other words, what you see is actually older than it actually is. You see the object as it was, not as it is. So everything appears younger to you. Which means that before there was beer and beer goggles, there was time goggles, where everything looks younger than it actually is. And we're all wearing time goggles all the time. Well, these problems from illusions, from perceptual relativity, from hallucinations, from time lag lead to an argument against direct realism. And we're going to call it the non-identity argument. And it's just got 4 premises, well, 3 premises and a conclusion. Premise 1, if direct realism is true, then the object of awareness, we'll abbreviate as OA, is numerically identical to the mind-independent external physical object, which we'll abbreviate as PO. And this is just the thesis of direct realism. This is the direct realism thesis, the core commitment of the theory. Premise 2, if OA is numerically identical to PO, then everything true of PO is true of OA, and everything true of OA is true of PO. And that just is an application of Leibniz's law, which we've seen several times throughout this semester. Premise 3. It is not the case that everything true of PO is true of OA, and everything true of OA is true of PO. Conclusion. So, direct realism is false. Now, the key premise is premise 3. We looked at that in the first lecture, and we should know Leibniz's law by now. Well, what defense can we give of premise 3? Well, there's the support from illusions. The railroad tracks we are directly aware of converge, but in reality, they are parallel. So it is not the case that the railroad tracks we are directly aware of are identical to the railroad tracks in reality. There's the support from perceptual relativity. The candy tastes sweet before I eat a salt packet, but the same candy then tastes salty after eating the salt packet. The water feels warm and then cold. However, the candy and the water as we know it as a physical object has not changed. So the object of my perceptual awareness, whether it be by taste or sight or feel, cannot be identical to the mind-independent physical object. And then recall, for something to be mind-independent is for it to exist and have the properties it has independently of anyone's perception of it. There is a support from hallucinations. When I hallucinate a pink elephant, the object of my awareness, well, resembles a pink elephant. Further, as a hallucinator, I have no way of telling that it's not, in fact, a real pink elephant. My experience is indistinguishable on the inside from someone else's real experience of a pink elephant. But recall, the direct realist holds that the object of perceptual awareness is numerically identical to the physical object. There that is again. However, there is no physical object to perceive, even though I see a pink elephant. So, the object of awareness cannot be identical to the physical object, because there is no physical object. There is also support from time lag again. Once again, if the object of awareness is numerically identical to the physical object, then everything true of the object of awareness is true of the physical object. Suppose you look at the sun. What you see is how the sun looked 8 minutes ago. So suppose at the same time you see the, quote, sun. There's a sunspot on the real sun. It would actually take an additional 8 minutes for the light from the sunspot to arrive at your retina. So the sun you see doesn't have a sunspot, while at the same time the real sun has a sunspot. So, by Leibniz's law, it can't be that the object of awareness is the physical object. Well, if the non-identity argument is sound, that is, it's valid, which it is, and it has true premises, then we have good reason to think that the non-identity argument is sound. Well, then you don't directly perceive any physical objects. Oh my God!
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Don't panic. There is a solution, and to find out the solution, watch the next lecture on representative realism. Thank you, and goodbye.